company now? Because we know you from working in Snøhetta. After Snøhetta, Håvard has established a new company, which is like super interested, bed monkeys. So I think I will let you to introduce them the best way.
Okay.
And we can start.
Thank you. And thank you, Radek, for inviting me to come back. I haven't been here since before Easter last year, which is when I quit, and it's really nice to be back. So I guess that the topic that you wanted to talk about was this new kind of application interface for Rhino that's called Rhino Inside. But I also want to talk a little bit about, just like zoom out a little bit and talk about what kind of problems we can solve and what we are doing since 1 year ago when I was completely alone. So I've run now the Bad Monkeys branch in Norway for 1 year, and it's going pretty good. On May 1st, Jostein joined me, so now we're 2. He comes from 10 years in Sweco, and he has a lot of background from the Dynamo community and conferences from Revit. That means that now we are based in these locations. We have 2 guys, that's me and Jostein in Norway, and then we have 1 guy in Berlin, 1 in France, 1 in Bulgaria, 3 guys in Australia, 1 in New York, and 1 in LA, which makes a total of...
Oh no. 10-ish?
I think you nailed that. 11 maybe? Yeah, I don't even know.
Okay.
Anyway, so how we're organized now loosely is that it's one business. Every geographical location is a separate business, and then we collaborate on work. So that in Norway we work a lot on the government quarter over at Byporten with Statsbygg and Nordic and Haptic, and on that project, Dimitar, who is located in Sofia in Bulgaria, is working with us as a subcontractor. And we're going to work with Norconsult in June, and then Conrad flies over to help out on some of the things. Dimitar has been doing some programming on Rhino Inside the last couple of days, and maybe I was hoping to show you something. Maybe I have a few pictures. First, what kind of problem are we looking to solve? And I think that, okay, it's very easy to think that, oh, there's a new tool, so let's grab it and see what it can do. I have been using Dynamo, which is the visual programming interface for Revit, for a couple of years now, and I think that not a lot of you have been trying that, but maybe Radek a little bit. But quite a few of you are used to the Grasshopper interface and have experience with Grasshopper either from school or at Snøhetta. So what is happening now is that the Rhino is coming inside of Revit, basically. That's the kind of main topic of this presentation. The problems that can solve is, for instance, problems like we had on Gullhaug Torg. Ann-Kristin? That was Paul that I was talking with at that time in the beginning when we were still shaping the building inside the Rhino and then constantly exporting into Revit. That export-import functionality is basically like the main topic of the problems that we're trying to solve is avoiding exports and imports, I think. And that caused a bunch of problems because the shape came in from Rhino into Revit, and then you would stitch a bunch of tilted walls on on those surfaces and then place windows in those walls. And then when something changed, you would do a re-export, and then Revit doesn't understand that it's the same element, and then it just deletes the wall and all the windows go away. And Ann-Cecilie spent like a lifetime trying to make those windows work, so that's kind of painful. That's a problem. Okay, so maybe we can try and see if there's tools appearing on the market that can solve that kind of thing. It was also a problem on Le Monde. We built a quite comprehensive Grasshopper and Dynamo and Mantis Shrimp and Flux workflow to make those facade panels go from Rhino into Revit. And that's maybe one of the best examples of a workflow like that I've ever seen, because we were able to work with Rhino as a shaping tool, Rikard and Alexandra, and Marcus up north, and then just link basic geometry and information and then recreate native Revit elements, which was then again used by the facade contractor in France So the whole process is kind of fluent without all the exports and imports, because an export is kind of like an image from a moment in history, and then 1 hour later or 2 weeks later it's outdated. So then being able to have this like flexible workflow from design to documentation and communication is, I think, very interesting. One interesting aspect of what can we do with this sort of workflows. And of course, also I have to mention this, that I worked with the BLF team with Radek, especially Radek with the facade, because that was a major headache to get that thing into Revit. I can basically, in retrospect, it feels like 3 years I spent at Snøhetta, one of my most important jobs was to force things into Revit, which was certainly the case with the facade with you, Radek. On the BLF team, not a lot of people who worked on that team had experience with Revit, so obviously we did a big push to change that. But of course, a lot of things were modeled in Rhino, and then pushed into the Revit model to have like a synchronized master of the building. So that's and that, as you can talk to Radek about for hours at end. It was I think we did some really amazing work with those scripts, but it wasn't painless. And I think you had some scripts that I made together with you that you had to run before you left at work, and then it was finished when you came back the day after. Yeah. So just 3 examples of kind of design documentation workflow problems that this tool can possibly solve. What's the solution? It can be. There should be a question mark here. I'm not sure, because this is kind of like right out of the box. I told you, Radek, and also Romana, that it's way too soon to come and show someone like Rhino inside, because it's very, very incomplete, but it seems like it has enormous potential for various reasons that I'm going to talk about.
It's the best idea ever.
Yeah, it possibly is. So it's very, very simple. It doesn't have an installer or something you can install. You cannot download an XC and install it yet. It's kind of like just a bunch of code, and then you have to build the code on your local computer. It builds a Revit add-in like a DLL file, and you put it on your whatever. And then it looks like this, Revit, and you have a Rhinoceros menu inside of Revit where you can either start Rhino, Grasshopper, Python, or pre-built workflows that you have kind of shaped for everyone. This is really interesting because you can open Grasshopper inside Revit and make a script that does something, and then you can kind of like bake that script and make it available for everyone at the office, which is a really smart way of scaling a workflow. Because as you all know, you have a bunch of dependencies in Grasshopper and stuff like that. So this is just samples that you can find online, and then what I'm going to do today mostly is like show you how this works. I still, by the way, use Dynamo on a daily basis, but not so much anymore for geometrical operations, and there's a lot with the user interface of Grasshopper that's much more smoother than the Dynamo user interface. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to do this now, and then I have with the permission, asked to show some kind of fantasy workflow on the BLF project. I found one of the old Revit files from, I think, a long time ago. Maybe something changed. But anyway, that's less important. So basically what I do, it's pretty simple. You have a Revit project, and then you start Grasshopper from within the add-ins menu of the Revit project. It's even the first time you click on it, it feels better than Dynamo, because you can start it in a perspective view, which kind of is not allowed yet in Dynamo. So Dynamo will just give you like a red warning if you do that in perspective in Revit. And then you get something like this, which is everything Grasshopper with all the menus, Archicad, Tekla, Kangaroo, Lunchbox, and so on, and the Revit tab that interacts with the Revit API.
It's funny that all the dots are blue.
It's really, really early stuff, so they haven't done anything with the icons or anything. But
who are they? Who is developing that?
McNeil.
Okay.
Yeah. It's McNeil mostly, but it's an open source project on GitHub here. And it has a project for Revit, it has a project for AutoCAD, it has a project, I think, even for some Adobe application. I think Rhino inside, you can click on this and you see, yeah, Adobe Illustrator, and then Autodesk, and then Revit. And this is where all the kind of the Revit API functionality is being built by an increasing user community in addition to the McNeil guys. Here you can, yeah, go here and read if you're interested. So,
have you ever find some comment from Autodesk what they think about it?
Nope.
No.
I just think they think it's great. If I was Autodesk, I would think it's great. And I think McNeil also thinks it's great.
McNeil thinks it's great, but I don't know about Autodesk.
I don't really care. No, Autodesk opened up the API for Revit in 2005, and then by doing that, you basically say, like, anyone on the planet, 5 billion people, you are free to develop add-ins or applications for our platform. So yeah, I don't think they kind of discriminate who is doing that and who is not. So anyway, this is I was able to find some obscure Grasshopper script that was doing some kind of ceiling test on the BLF project. It has some math and some randomness, and I think, yeah, maybe if I do like this, you can see what it kind of is doing. Yeah, so it's just a pattern of polylines that's being repeated in a grid. Do you remember this? Yeah, Reynold does. Yeah, I think it was. I think it lasted for a few days, this exercise. But anyway, I'm just using it to kind of show how this can work. So in the end here, I'm getting a bunch of B reps. Yeah, there are two attractor points as well. That's kind of like creating this shape by the window behind the lecture in the lecture hall of the BLF. And then I'm trying this now because this is kind of like development that we're doing right now. I'm trying it with a bunch of closed B reps, with some merged face B reps, with a bunch of mesh and a joint mesh. So that's kind of like what I'm testing now. You can, with the Revit menu, build a bunch of different things. But like I said, I think I told you, Romana, on the phone, that where the Grasshopper for Rhino inside really lacks is the amount of available commands. That in Dynamo you have like thousands of components that you can do different things with, because there's a huge community that has been developing on it for like 5-6 years. Here is a very limited amount of things you can do in Revit. So you can do a beam by curve, column by curve, floor by outline, roof by outline, and so on. So then you can build native Revit elements based on Grasshopper data. Okay, and you can also edit information. You can work with categories, you can extract document information, and you can also work with parameters. For instance, writing a parameter or reading a parameter from some kind of Revit element, or a bunch of things. So this first exercise, the first things that we're kind of trying to solve, the first problem that we're trying to solve, is to just get Rhino geometry in as good way into Revit as possible, with materials for kind of like force-project, schist-project, schematic design kind of situations. So this is just a very... Sorry?
Can I have just a question? I mean,
yeah.
If there is something which we find out during the process that is lacking and we need it, is a bad mind piece, are you... Yeah, you can do that?
I have a phone and you can call it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely kind of like our maybe our main business model. So anyway, just want to show a couple of quick what this can become in Revit. I have a 3D view, and then when I click on some node, the geometry preview is already like a gazillion times better than the one in Dynamo. And it responds to kind of like preview selection in the exact same way that Rhino does. And then there's a couple of different ways I can create geometry from Grasshopper inside Revit. We can try with, I have a B-reps. If I have a B-rep, there's a B-rep component. Yes?
So when you hit the button in Grasshopper, it shows a preview in Revit that is not bakeable yet. Is that the thing? So you have to bake it to these buttons.
And then, of course, with Rhino and Grasshopper, you can just right-click bake because they are the same. Yeah. And in Revit, you have to say, to Revit in Revit's language, I want this to be something.
I kind of bake as this or bake as that.
Yeah. And that's like a whole crazy ball game to understand what that is, because Revit can build so many different things. But in the recent releases of Revit, they have introduced first a direct shape element, which is just like a dumb geometry. That was what allowed them to do the link IFC feature in Revit like many years ago, direct shape. And then they also introduced actually a B-rep, so you can build a B-rep in Revit now. And that's why you have a add B-rep shape by B-rep component.
So that's a category, B-rep.
Yes, but still Revit's B-reps are more strict than Rhino's B-reps, so they sometimes still fail. But this is really interesting, and all we usually want to do on a schematic design situation is just build some geometry and put a material and category to it, and that's enough. So when I say to you,
generic model or
whatever, you have a categories pull-down menu that pulls out the Revit categories, and then you can assign categories to it. So what we're trying to do now in the government quarter is just build so you select a category, it's a ceiling, it's a wall, it's a railing, it's a stair or whatever, and then you put some parameters to it, for instance like IFC class or blah blah blah, whatever kind of information, and then we just want to build a bunch of like railing is specifically painful in Revit, so that's I think really interesting to be able to work in that way.
Where is your input?
The input here, it takes basically just a bound. It's in Rhino actually.
So that's in Rhino, so you can't open Grasshopper without the Rhino file?
Yes, you can. But unless actually the tool here, it says Rhino toggle Rhino window visibility. So I think the moment you click on the Grasshopper, it also opens up Rhino in the background. So these two processes are now running inside the Revit application. But you actually, if you reference some geometry from the Rhino window, you have to also open the Rhino.
Reference stuff from Revit.
Yeah. Where is that? Here? Here. Yeah. Select edge, select face, select vertex, select element, select.
But the only input you have here is a point.
The only input I have here, I have I have a point, I have a couple of attractor points, and well, what does it look like? Yeah, points, and then a boundary, and kind of like the main shape of the ceiling. Yes?
Is that a Grasshopper and Rhino file that were done before, and then you kind of open this pre-done file in
Yes. Also forgot to mention, you need to have Rhino work in progress. It's not going to work on Rhino 5 or 6. You need to install Rhino work in progress. But if you have a licensed Rhino 6, that's not a problem. You just download it, but it expires after, I don't know, 30 or 40 days or something.
I think we have our analysis stuff. We have the...
Yeah, we have it.
Yeah.
Instead of using that boundary line you have in Rhino, you can use a boundary line straight from Revit instead.
Yeah.
Or like a floor, regular floor?
Yeah.
Like that.
Select floor. I don't know. Where is it? Somewhere here. You reference an element. Document elements, or I don't remember.
Do you need a Rhino file?
No.
Just one note, because I have some feedback from people, but when we asking questions, just try to make it loud, so people hear it.
By the way, I forgot to say this, but we have a 30-minute presentation. There's 5 minutes left, but we were a little bit late. So then I have said to Radek, I can stay back here for 30 more minutes until lunch for a QA. So maybe we can talk a little bit about it then. Anyway, I just wanted to quickly, before we finish up this, see how you can create a a B-rep. This is a B-rep in Revit, or actually a bunch of B-reps. And they are linked to the grasshopper file. So whatever change I do now, if I move the attractor points or do whatever to the boundary or something, it's going to update. The funny thing is that in the first alpha version of Rhino Inside, they already solved kind of like the linking issue of Dynamo in a better way than Dynamo was able to. I'm talking a lot of shit about Dynamo now. It's Dynamo still has a lot of. But,
can you just show it? How it
sorry?
Can you just show it? Demonstrate it?
What?
That is changing.
Change.
Ah, that's like you're asking me to do like the demo hell. It's of course it's going to break, but yeah, maybe we can show it at the end. But I just wanted to show a couple of the other. Nice try. No, so anyway, this is like more than 700 elements, and I think that was pretty quickly generated by Grasshopper, and it's separate elements, kind of like the facade cladding that we did on BLF. And now I can put a lot of information to these elements, but there's no material, and that's kind of like the main thing missing right now for this to work. So the B-rep generator doesn't have material or category or name input. It just takes a B-rep and creates a B-rep, and then you have to. So we have to build something. I got this picture from Dimitar like 40 minutes ago, and I sent him a Rhino file with 3 different layers with 3 different materials, and I think now we're able actually to recreate that in Revit with also as solid elements with materials. But I don't have that file here now. And so yeah, this will update.
Because basic materials, you were able to get those when you open a Rhino file in Revit. You will get a layer color.
It will get the layer color, yes. But then you change that material, and then you delete it and import again a new version, and then it doesn't find this. So that's a broken workflow, and we're trying to make that better. Also interesting is that it's locked. These elements are locked to the Grasshopper script as long as these elements are pinned. So you have to, if I unpin this element, it's going to create a duplicate with the Grasshopper, and then forget about the previous element. So
if you then create a new one, you will have two.
Yeah, I will disconnect this guy here, and then I'm going to select all of these guys, unpin them, and then delete them. So this, I think, is going to. There's a lot of this, like how Grasshopper is now interacting with Revit, that's kind of doesn't work that well. But I think the potential is amazing. So I can also show how it can create like one uniform mesh, because as you saw in the picture here, I have blue, red, yellow. I want them to be the same material, and I want also them to be the same element, because you don't want 4,000 stones inside a Revit model. It's huge. So you want 1, 2, 3 elements, and this is tricky. Yes, Martin.
You're not baking it; it's just baked immediately when you plug it in.
Yeah, and then one point in future, you're going to be. I don't think that works now, but I want to be able to right-click and bake, and then it loses the connection. So that should be pretty simple, probably. You just need to unpin it, basically, in Revit.
But would you be able to reconnect it again, then, you think?
I don't know. So I'm going to take that one guy away and just show quickly the last kind of option we have for dumb geometry, which is a direct shape that can take any type of geometry, whether it's a mesh or a B-rep, open, closed, and then assign a category to it. Because these previous 2 guys, you can create a mesh in Revit, you can create a B-rep in Revit, but they don't have material category or any kind of other input. But the direct shape does have category and name, but not material. So that's what we're working on right now. So this now will become a ceiling element. Ceiling. And you can also add some parameters to it. I am a ceiling. All right. And then, of course, it's all updated in Enscape. So that kind of workflow I see now a lot of architects are using to work in the parametric with not to model one wall and one door, but to model like to to more complex shapes. And every time you modify an element that's more, if you have more than 50, 100 elements, it makes sense to make a script. Whether or not you are just going to be the one using it, or you want to share it with other people to scale that value. And then going from there and to this like gaming environment in Lumion, Unreal, or Enscape, and then being inside that model, that's something that I see a lot of people are now really interested in. Just to finish up the presentation itself, I just wanted to say that, repeat what I just said, I guess. Oops. Future. Is there a future? Yeah. Something like, oh, there we are, let's go. 10 years ago, you had one tool. Today, maybe you have 3, 4, 5, 6. And in the future, I think people are going to have a big collection of tools. And then it's a difficult job to connect all these to one workflow. I know the guys that I'm working with at the government quarter, they are using Revit, Rhino, Grasshopper, interior architects with ArchiCAD, engineers with Tekla, Enscape for visualization, and then they're exporting to CDFD, and then I'm the Revit API guy. So to stitch this whole system together without exports and imports, it's kind of like one thing that we're trying to solve, and then the other is more like automation-based design and documentation and communication. And this is what's happening. This is from Jostein's presentation at Build Europe last year, where architects and programmers, this is maybe, I don't have any data saying this is true, but I think that what has been a problem for the building industry international, like the world in the building industry for a very long time, is that the people making tools and the people using them in the building industry has been too far away from each other. And with the introduction of visual programming tools like Dynamo for Revit and Grasshopper for Rhino, this is starting to change. Because once you start using those components and once you start poking into how lists work and lacing and stuff like that, and you soon start to understand things about how an application interfaces with another application, which is called an application programming interface, like an API, I think we can start, and if not kind of completely overlap, but at least create a little bit of a better understanding of how software works. And that's not why I'm doing this. I do this because it's fun, but it's kind of like it's a side effect that I think is really interesting. And with that, I conclude the presentation. And now you are free to leave, but if you want to hang back, I will sit here until lunch, I guess.
Can you just drag the slider and change the shape?
I was hoping you had forgotten. Maybe we can do something fun, Martin. What if we just kind of try to I'm going to say Enscape, resume live updates.
That's a good idea.
And then minimize everything except Enscape and Grasshopper. Let's see. But if I minimize Revit, it's going to also minimize Grasshopper, so I have to kind of keep it down here. Oh, okay, like this. And then Rhino, we don't need you. And let's see, what can we change?
You just move the attractor point.
Yeah, then I'm going to actually take down Grasshopper and open this guy and then take that point. I need to do like this, yeah. Where's my gumball? There. Let's move it over here. And then it's a pretty big Revit model, so probably takes a little bit of time until Enscape updates, but I can clearly see Revit working. Oh, there we are. Yeah.
history in the making here. Where were you when
When Håvard
moved the
dragged the slider.
We're gonna sit there with our grandchildren.
Small step to the point.
Yeah.
I am quite amazed with I'm just wondering about your thoughts on the next step or differences between Rhino inside and Dynamo. So how Dynamo is it is still better, but I see kind of the direction going different.
So what Dynamo has?
What will be what's the future of Dynamo?
I think where Dynamo actually has a real potential that Grasshopper will never have is automating Revit. Like you can create a Dynamo script that can open 500 Revit models, run 500 Dynamo graphs on each Revit model, and just create a bunch of data. You can automate Revit because Dynamo can tell a Revit session what to do. Extract all the walls and all the information on all the walls and put it in an Excel spreadsheet by tomorrow morning. That kind of stuff is we're trying to do a lot on the government quarter and also elsewhere. But I think that any type, like if you have used both programs, right? That Grasshopper user interface with the shortcuts, Control E, Control Q, move around, copy, how lists work, I think maybe it's a little bit similar in both programs, but it just feels so nice to work with geometry in Grasshopper. So I think that people doing geometry in Dynamo, they will not do it for a very long time. But people managing data in Revit will continue to use Dynamo. Numbers and text.
How much data can you transfer? Can you transfer like numbering and lettering and like
anything?
Areas? So when you do like schemes for this type of roof, how useful is it?
Well,
the lines are everything is there, so you can easily do drafting and measurements.
Yeah, that again, that comes a little bit back to how good a job the McNeil guys on GitHub are doing this, because Rhino and Revit at the core of the software. You may remember when Angel Velez came from here, and he said that like any modeling tool in the world has a different understanding of tolerance. So Revit has a different tolerance than Rhino does. So when Rhino models something and Revit is supposed to understand it, like what is a parallel curve? That's a tolerance. So whether or not you can dimension two surfaces kind of depends on what happens between this node and this node. So I don't have a super simple answer to that, but
It's not very smart because very often when you export things from Rhino, which are perfectly fine in Rhino, they're closed. They're not complicated. 5 of them appear in Revit, but 7 don't.
Yeah.
And you don't know why.
It's weird.
yeah. And
how is it now? Does it work?
This
to
is
do sections and to do
yeah.
like plan drawings and stuff.
Oh, that's why we're doing this.
Yeah. So it
Because
works a lot better.
Because you can Revit has become much easier to work with geometry by the introduction of B-reps. But you can model a mesh, you can do a direct shape in Revit, and you can still dimension to parallels, parallel surfaces, and you can tag them and apply materials to them and categories and so on. Which means that at the end you can export an IFC and send it to whoever building owner and say, hey, look what.
And ideally you would make all the sheets and then you can change it and then all the dimensions annotations will change.
No, that's tricky. Because when you dimension like the openings, the window openings in a wall, the dimension line knows which element ID of the reference inside the window family. Yeah. So the window family in Revit, it has reference planes. And those reference planes have element IDs, which is just a number. And then the dimension line understands that reference. It remembers. That's why when you move a window, the dimension line moves. It's that the dimension line knows this reference. But then when you start doing this between Rhino and Revit, that's a difficult thing. But I'm hoping that will work better.
Face to face, it's the same face, it's just larger.
What I think, because I will not any longer export a DWG or an SAT file from Rhino. I will create it from within the Revit application. I hope that those ideas are going to be remembered in a better way and just updated.
What about speed? Because yesterday when we imported some files from Rhino, the whole model got really slow and
Yeah.
so how will this affect speed?
It kind of depends.
How strong is your? It doesn't look so strong, but it seems to run very.
And this fan is crazy. So the fact that the fan is not running is beyond me. No, it depends on your understanding of geometry and the Revit API. So right here, the easy explanation here is that I have a bunch of complex elements like 700 plus, and then I'm creating one mesh with several hundred surfaces, but just one instance. And that's going to be much easier for the Revit database to handle than 700 instances.
What about the other way around? I have a Revit model, or project in Revit, and then I want to create a complicated shape, and I have to use Rhino for that. Now I'm exporting the Revit model and import it into Rhino, and then I model that thing in Rhino, and then I put it back into Revit. So how is there workflow for this within this, or?
Yeah.
Can I open Revit file in Rhino with that?
You can. You have this element geometry component that can extract any geometry from an element that you select. But I really haven't. You have a select element here somewhere. Build.
Yeah, but I think the most important is that we now know that tool exists, and we can start to test on that.
Is the tool meant to sort of be because now we're kind of used to whenever we need to get something from Rhino into Revit, it's sort of like a one-time job because you can't do anything about it after it's in Revit, right? But is this sort of meant to run all the time, so every time you're working on the Revit model, all these scripts are running, so you can work on them? Like I'm just thinking, if you have to tweak something after you've put it inside and you baked it, can you tweak it in Revit, or do you have to go back, plug into Grasshopper again, and tweak it there?
That depends on what you're doing.
So in the case of this ceiling, if there's like a couple of those chunks that maybe are in the way. I mean, I understand that they're the same element, but they are several instances. So you can delete. You don't have to delete all of them.
Yeah,
Can you like if you want one to be longer or shorter or deeper, can you fix that in Revit, or do you have to go back and do it in Grasshopper?
Hello. You can do whatever you want.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do that, or you can make it like a dead geometry. The more dead the geometry is, the less you can interact with it. That's like the basic rule. The mesh that I just created is super fast, but it's a dead geometry. In Revit, but of course you can change it in Rhino and Grasshopper.
Yeah.
But so then.
But if you would have a floor and you would make something to a floor, then you would be able to add the outlines.
Yes.
Later.
Yeah. You would or you wouldn't?
You would.
Oh, okay. So
but
even if you
it's difficult to take it back again because then it doesn't relate to the script that you already made.
As soon as you've given it
That's the question of this ID still. How far you can go so the Revit still remember the same ID.
Yeah. Isn't it like baked geometry? So when you bake it in Rhino, it's that as well.
Right.
And then you can edit it in Rhino, but it's not linked to the script anymore.
Right.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Exactly same thing.
One of the really basic.
And it's like the Le Mans facade is an example of that. We had the opportunity to just link in that geometry, and we were doing that even before I came here. and during that fall also. But then we decided that we wanted to have that opportunity because we wanted to go around the walls maybe and move some elements, change something manually or delete some panels. And then instead of creating geometry, we placed native geometry with either a point or a line or something. And then, of course, so the difference is kind of here. If you're making a beam or a column or a family instance, floor, roof, wall, you're creating a native Revit element just like you would with the mouse.
Yeah.
But if you're creating a direct shape, which is just like a blob, then that kind of is a slave of the Grasshopper script, and you cannot...
Then can you imagine that you make a workflow where you just have a Rhino file that you use as a base, which is like a Rhino file where you drop your geometry from Rhino that you want to import in Revit, and then you use a simple script where it's just linking elements. And basically it just sends automatically things you have on your Rhino model to Revit, so that in a way you can walk on your side on the Revit, someone walk on his side on the Rhino. You just update this Rhino file all the time, and then it's linking the geometry automatically to the Rhino model with maybe geometry pipeline or something.
Yes.
As long as you don't unpin it, it's still connected, right?
Yeah, but now you're talking about referencing Revit geometry and creating Rhino geometry, right?
No, the opposite.
Oh, the opposite.
So that where you work on geometry on you know, we want using the script, like, you know, you work on the geometry on your Rhino file, maybe not using Grasshopper. You just make your B-reps and stuff, and you're instead of exporting them one by one, you know, in the Revit or something, you just use this tool to link the geometry with pipelines.
Yes.
Like you have a dump file, a dump Rhino file, will just drop the geometry with layers, and then automatically just send on the Revit model at the right place.
What I would do is that I would work, because the Rhino and Grasshopper application is running inside Revit, it's slower. It feels slower than working with this disconnected Revit, Rhino and Grasshopper application, because it's always talking to Revit. It's like always on the phone. What's going on? Did anything change? Blah blah blah. So shut up. So then I would kind of like the workflow I'm imagining, kind of like in a perfect Nirvana world, is that I would design something in a separate Rhino and Grasshopper session. Then I would reference the relevant geometry, not everything, but what I need with speckle into the Grasshopper definition that's running inside Revit. And then that geometry creates something in Revit, and not maybe work in the Revit Grasshopper application.
Once more, my very concrete question is, I have a project in Rhino, and I have to draw a handrail. And as you said as well, handrails in Revit are not possible.
Yeah.
So I want to make a nice, super simple thing. It's just a sweep. But I need I need to do it in Rhino. So, but I have the project in Revit. So how should I do that?
Well, tomorrow you should use the Rhino inside for it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is what it's all about.
Yeah, but how do you
place
link the Revit geometry? How do I get that into Rhino to make my 3D line?
There's a bunch of different ways you can do that. The most simple way is just create a section box in Revit of the stair, and then put that into Rhino. Make a line where you want the railing to be, a profile.
Yeah, but that still means I have to export Revit geometry into Rhino. Is that what you're saying?
Just to know where it is in
Don't need
right?
to. You can reference it also into Grasshopper.
That was my question. So I can reference Revit geometry into...
Yes.
That was exactly my question.
It's what I'm not being able to find that select element here, but you have select edge, face, and vertex.
Just
so
to get the position and the location.
Extract the edges.
What I suggested to some guys at the government quarter, because we're making lots of like fillet based curvy railings, and maybe a workflow I would like to test is you model a stair in Revit, and then you model the simplest railing element possible, like just maybe even an invisible or something. Fake element, and then you just select that element in Grasshopper, extract its location line, and then use that in Grasshopper to kind of sweep any type of profile, and then create a railing. But I haven't tested that.
Such a word as simple. But
no, it's not.
The
but
really basic problem that we had is it's just like you can't make all the walls, for example.
Yeah.
the line.
Is that
like
something that
railing
is somehow changing with this, or?
So that's something that will probably appear here pretty soon, wall by face,
I did it in
but it's not there anymore. It's
We have such a simple thing. We have an angle facade of 7 degrees, and then we have like 100 windows, and then we had to change just the outline geometry of it, and it was really difficult to do it in Revit.
Yeah.
But if we import a new element from Rhino, we have to replace all the windows. Really basic.
Yeah.
That's something that would be, because if you have the wall here by face and you change that geometry, the windows will stay in the same position and the outline will just change.
But that brings
in theory, yes.
Yes.
In theory, yes. And I think that maybe some of these components already have like an input for ID, so you can force a component to use an element ID and to update an element that already exists. Yeah, you're this wall. You're this wall, and that's what you're going to be your whole life.
But if you annotated all these windows and then you change the overall shape and the windows change in Grasshopper, super fine, nice. But will the annotation, as Nikolai asked?
Yeah. Don't annotate.
Also, like Morten, that's pretty simple. If you have to reinvent the wheel, it's better to call Håvard or Vasshaug and ask for quick solution.
Yeah.
I mean, this is also like one of the
But like
ideas
the
behind
example from
inviting
above.
Håvard.
We have a contract with Håvard now.
Yeah.
Set
Oh,
up, so he is allowed to present there for
Speaking
half an hour.
of, we actually don't, but
Line.
Because that was kind of my question: how that works to collaborate now with Redmantis? If we have to do something on VLF like quite immediately.
But you have a lot of
I was.
consonants on VLF. You
So
have
it's like a
Revit,
question how that
Maria.
works with Redmantis. Am I calling you and next day you're coming, or are you booked in advance, or like how that works in VLF?
Have you seen how tan it looks? Not much in Oslo.
I'm on the beach.
You're on the beach.
Yes, hello. No.
Depends.
I don't know. We have maybe the ideal, our dream client. We are assigned to a project, working with the team on the project, helping with anything that's kind of like slightly relevant, and then we program where it needs to be programmed. But we also have a bunch of clients where we just send code. Oh, I need a B-rep with material. Okay. But I think the most successful implementations that we have is when we're an integrated part of the team. Bringing those circles together. So, but it's like, we do, I even make a coffee at the government quarters. So it's, we work in many different models.
Okay. Hey, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. I hope it was interesting.
It is quite mind-blowing, really. This is how it should be.
So, Rhino work in progress, and how do we get? Do you know how to get this done?
No, I think that
I
might be.
tried to check it. It sounded complicated. There was some. I was in that GitHub site, and I was
Yeah.
like, okay, it's a little bit about mine.
Maybe that's one of the first tasks for the developers to do.
I like måte, Morten.
Det ser Nokia in
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. I can give you the. Yeah, it's better to talk to me.
Understand that better than.
Maybe
you
Alan
do.
would. You kind of need to go into Visual Studio and then bake that as an add-in and place it somewhere in the Revit app. Yeah.
I kind of stopped at it. How is it called?
But you got here?
Yeah, I can't. No, I just told me that I had to. I didn't find the installer file, and
So-
it said
Yeah.
something on GHL or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's it's one of the first tasks we should.
Yeah.
But is that the what is it? Is it licensed or is it what's the code?
Yeah. No, it's licensed, but it's licensed with the Rhino work in progress. Where is it? There? Rhino VIP.
Yeah.
It's a completely separate application that's called, it actually is Rhino 7, but it's just called Rhino VIP. And it's licensed with the same license that you have on Rhino 6. So it's just download, put your email, download, install.
Alan has done that for.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that.
And then it lasts for, I don't know, 30, 40 days or something. And then it expires and you have to download another version.
Yeah, there's an update. But I think I didn't, he told me I installed it in the wrong day, but if you have it installed the right way, I think it wouldn't run out.
Have it and it's.
It's not running out? Yeah, because I didn't read what he said. I just clicked this stuff.
What do we have for lunch?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
If that
Christian
is,
ska till
if that is
Barcelona.
working,